For many religious and spiritual traditions, this time of year, when autumn's bounty gives way to winter's waiting, is a time to pay tribute to the ancestors. Many traditions acknowledge the thinning of the veil between life and death at this time, from the Celtic holiday of Samhain and the ancient Mexican tradition of Dia de los Muertos to the Christian holy days of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. We recognize the great mystery of death and celebrate the memory of love. My theological reflections about this time of year are influenced by my life experiences and relationship to my own ancestors. I know something about the stock that I come from. My great-great-great-grandfather, who befriended a young Abraham Lincoln in Illinois and then moved west during the gold rush to settle in Sebastopol. He was a minister, as it turns out, and his wife loved to tend her orchard. They and 4 generations of descendants of mine are buried in the Sebastopol cemetery, and I visit them pretty regularly, though not as often as my grandmother and mother would have liked me to. My Finnish great-grandparents moved to the US before my grandfather was born. My great-grandfather became an architect through correspondence school and designed beautiful buildings. My grandfather had 9 siblings, many of whom I remember and fondly. They loved family reunions, picnics, music, and being together with good laughter. My family tree looks pretty rosy and filled with love. Yet, of course, there were dark times and secrets, too. Most of these are known but not talked about. Is that true in your family as well? Right? There's some secrets back there. Yet the effects of those events can be, and too often are, passed down to us anyway. Now, in recent memory, my own parents' divorce was one of those dark times. I was 10 years old when Dad left our family, and he married a woman who had what I felt at the time was like a replacement family. I mean, really, she had 2 daughters who were about the same age as my sister and me. I mean, come on, Dad. So not cool there. My relationship with my dad remained confusing and sad and uncomfortable a lot of the time, though it got better once he found sobriety and I found a group for families of alcoholics. And still, until his death, which was when I was 30, it always felt like there were things left unsaid between us. But an interesting thing happened. After he died, I had a series of spontaneous visualizations of him, you might call them, or imagined conversations with him that ultimately allowed me to forgive him and find peace. In one of those visualizations, about a year after his death, I had a strong image of him in my room, and I told him I could see he had been crying. And he explained to me how this happened, I don't know, and you can, think about it your own way, but it felt very real to me. He explained that he had been doing a lot of grieving and healing. A lot of grieving and healing. And in that moment, I felt this flood of compassion for him and felt his love for me. And over time, and with plenty of therapy, I stopped seeing him as simply a flawed man who did the best that he could. That's often what we say, isn't it? I started to feel that and so much more. I started to imagine or know him as a fully human being who blessed me with all of his complexity and his love. Now, Barbara Kingsolver writes, "What a rich wisdom it would be, and how much more bountiful a harvest, to gain pleasure not from achieving personal perfection, but from understanding the inevitability of imperfection and pardoning those who also fall short of it." And that I was able to do with my father. Now, I don't want to suggest that everyone should be able to forgive as easily as I did, or feel the same kind of love for ancestors or others who hurt you. I don't mean to trivialize any pain you are carrying. My ability to forgive, in part, comes from my, deep-seated belief that I can never know another person's whole story. So there's always room for my perspective to shift. And that leaves me open to change and forgiveness. Yet I do believe that the act of forgiveness frees us to be more fully ourselves and more loving. And as John Donahue said, when you forgive, some deeper divine generosity takes over. When you can forgive, then you are free. This isn't an idle statement or a platitude. My experience tells me that it is truth. Forgiveness frees us to live more authentically and love more fully. You don't have to love the person that you've forgiven more fully. You don't have to do that. Sometimes it's quite appropriate not to trust them. It's appropriate to be wary of them or keep a distance. And yet, it still can mean that you're freed up to love the people you want to love better. And it means you just might get to see your own shortcomings as part of your humanness and forgive yourself too. When we were planning this service, Anne offered me this observation. Forgiveness teaches us to accept the inevitability of imperfection in ourselves and others. In doing so, we become better prepared to embrace death with grace. This is particularly important when reflecting on the complex legacies we inherit from our ancestors. Many cultures and spiritual traditions, particularly around this time of year, like Dia de los Muertos and All Saints' Day, focus on honoring ancestors while also acknowledging the difficulties passed down through the generations. By forgiving the mistakes and harms of those who came before us, we release ourselves from carrying those burdens forward, freeing the next generation from the weight of inherited pain. She turned me on to a book called The 4 Things That Matter Most by Ira Byock, in which he writes that saying, "I forgive you," and "please forgive me," are among the most important conversations people can have, especially when facing death, but I think any time. They're invitations to both closure and peace. And Byock writes, "Forgiveness is a passage to a sanctuary of wholeness, that nurturing place where we feel intimately connected to the people who matter most to us. This can make us more present to the dying process, but also the living process as we make peace with the past. When we forgive, we see those who we forgive as flawed, yet worthy of compassion, understanding, and our love. In acknowledging the missteps of our ancestors and ourselves, we move toward self-acceptance and self-compassion. My experience with forgiving my father helped me to start seeing myself in all of my rich complexity. And it opened up to me the next chapter of my life, in which I married a divorced man with 2 children. See how that works? And learned to make a family of my own. I confess that I was not always at my best in that process, especially in those early years. And I hope my children will forgive me in my imperfections as I am learning to forgive them myself. I want that freedom for all of us. May we find the grace to forgive ourselves and each other. May forgiveness set us free. Amen. And now I want to invite you into a moment of ritual as we remember our ancestors. The ancestors remembered here on this altar are but a small portion of those lives who made our lives possible. Imagine, if you can, the grandparents and great-grands and great-great-grands who came before you. Whether you knew them or not, whether experience and family lore have given them a revered status or have marked them as a source of pain or shame or anger, they are your roots. They are a part of you. And how we hold that matters. Can you imagine one person or many in that crowd of ancestors who you might feel the need to forgive? And I'm not talking about a large wound or trauma. This isn't really the time or place probably to do that. But rather someone who maybe disappointed you, who let you down. Can you acknowledge that they really did the best that they could at the time? Can you find a way to offer them forgiveness? And let us also remember that we ourselves are imperfect beings. Perhaps you have not lived up to your own expectations. Perhaps you disappointed someone and could use some forgiveness. Can you acknowledge that you did the best that you could at the time? Can you extend forgiveness to yourself? In a moment, as you sit with these questions, I will invite you to come up to this altar space, if you wish, to light one of the LED candles in a gesture of forgiveness. You may choose to say to yourself, "I forgive you," or "I forgive myself." And then if you wish, you can receive an affirmation or blessing from Anne or me. We'll be up here as well. And so I invite you into this moment with this intention. As we light these candles, we honor the good in our ancestors while offering forgiveness for their mistakes. Just as they were imperfect, so are we. In forgiving them, we make space for healing in our own lives. May the light of love and forgiveness bring healing across the generations. And now when you're moved, you may come on up.